So we're going to start this morning with Nat Cooper. Nat was very involved with AIM getting off the ground. And again, I know he had some help. But Nat's going to come up here and he's going to share with us what that was like and what he saw. And then after that, Don Solomon was brought on board to be, I think, maybe the first full-time director of AIM. But he could not be here. He just recently had heart surgery, as well as just taking a new job and just could not get away. And I know they very much wanted to. And so we were able to interview him a week or two ago, and we're going to show that video after Nat. So anyways, Nat, thank you for helping in all that you did getting in the early days. And so I want to invite you up here. I remember when I was in AIM in 1981, you were one of my teachers. And I remember you had a class, I think it was called Life of Christ. I think it was your class where we had to memorize 100 scriptures. And I remember taking the test of that and not doing so well. So, but I remember just over the years listening to you speak. You have some really intense passion when you're talking about the Lord, and when you're talking about His Word, and when you're talking about youth. Nat for years has been involved in traveling all over this world and talking about how character is important, and helping people on the other side of the world use Bible principles in developing character in young people. He's super passionate about that. And I love hearing you speak about everything, but I especially love hearing you speak about AIM. And so, Nat, would you come and share with us what that was like for you? So let's give Nat a hand, please.
When I was looking out this morning and seeing all these kids, it reminded me of my favorite joke. And you'll want to use this, Rex, so listen real good. It's about 3 guys that were in the waiting room at the hospital. Their families were expecting children. And a nurse came to the window, and she had twins. She looked at one of the men, and he said, "Me?" And she, "Yes." He said, "Isn't that remarkable?" He said, "I work for the Double Bubble Gum Company." Then another nurse came out, and she had 3. And she looked at one of the men and he said, "Me? 3?" He said, "Isn't that a coincidence? I work for 3M Corporation." Well, about that time, 2 nurses started out, and this one guy, he made for the door, and they grabbed him and said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm getting out of here." He said, "I work for 7-Up." An old Indian father called his 3 sons together. He wanted to find out which son had the most promise. He began to talk with them and tried to build them up in their hearts and in their souls. Then he pointed at a large, majestic mountain away in the background. It had snow on the top. It looked very, very wild and very, very rough. He said, "I want you to go and I want you to climb that mountain." Well, after several months, the first son returned home, and he said, "Father, all I have in my hand is a lily white flower." The father took the flower, he looked at it, he said, "My son, I'm so proud of you. I know how far you were able to go. You were able to make it above the timber country, and I myself have stood where you stood. It really is a beautiful, beautiful place." Then after about a year, the second son returned home, and in his hand he had a piece of flint rock, and the father took the flint rock. He examined it, and he said, "My son, I'm very proud of you. I know how far you were able to go. you were able to make it almost to the top, 2/3 way up the precipice. And he says, I myself have stood where you stood. He says, I know what it is to have the hot sun beating down on your back all day long. I know what it is to have the nettles and various types of rough foliage pulled at your skin and tear you and rip you. He said, I know all of that. Your toes get sore as you try to reach out for your next grip. He said, I'm very, very proud of you. After 2.5 years, the third son returned home. And he said, Father, he said, I want to tell you, I have nothing in my hand to bring you. But he said, where I stood, I was able to look out. And I was able to see 2 great rivers meet and flow into the ocean. And the old father said, my son, I'm indeed very proud of you. It may be true that you have nothing in your hand, but because of where you stood, you have vision in your soul. That's the first illustration we used in trying to recruit people for AIM. We would go from place to place and try to incite young men and women to have a vision in their soul for the cause of Jesus Christ. It's so easy, to be a member of the body of Christ and certainly attend services and not get into any trouble and be quite good in your morals and things of that nature. But I believe that there's more in us than that. I believe that those are things that should be characteristic of kingdom people anyway. But at the same time, kingdom people should be people of vision. They should be people who have vision of soul and who are always looking for ways in which they would be able to reach out to other people and win them to the Lord Jesus Christ. Hear ye children the instruction of a father, and attend to no understanding, for I give you good doctrine. Forsake ye not my law, for I was my father's son, tender and deeply beloved in the sight of my mother. He taught me also and said unto me, let not thine eyes forsake my word. Keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Forget it not, and neither decline from the words of my mouth. We felt that Proverbs chapter 4, 1-4, had all of the necessary ingredients that we were trying to reach out to the father, to the mother, to the sons, to the daughters, and ask them, won't you believe the word to such an extent that you would allow his word to be active in your life? So, Proverbs 4, 1-4 was the first scripture that we used when we were promoting the Adventures in Missions program wherever we went. I was standing in the hallway at the water fountain just opposite the office, waiting for my wife. It was a Wednesday evening. It was about 1972 or 73. And along comes Brother Gerald Payton. Gerald said, well, congratulations. The elders think it's a good idea sending our youth to help in mission fields, and so they have appointed you to organize a program for this to happen. And that was the first I ever heard of this idea. I had not been in a single meeting. I had not talked with anyone. No one had approached me. And then here comes Gerald. And knowing the kind of a lark, that's an Irish expression for a guy full of fun, that Gerald is, I just knew that he was kidding. So I really didn't pay it any mind until people started handing out their hand and saying congratulations. Well, that was the first I heard of it. And 16 had gone to Dublin by that time. I'd had the privilege of going over to Ireland and organizing and helping them with their work, and they were really tremendous young men and women. I was so impressed with them, and they worked for Brother Tony Coffey in Dublin, and they did an excellent work. In fact, there are people in Dublin today who still talk about that particular group. I took off for a semester from teaching in the classroom and traveled about, and we went to about 7 states spreading the news about AIM. I had a little orange Volkswagen, and congregations, Bible chairs, colleges, universities, any place we could get an opportunity to talk about AIM. Well, we took that opportunity. The concept got tremendous reception, and I heard of spin-offs that were happening in other places. In fact, I heard about Bible chairs that thought this was a great idea, and they started their own idea of going off into other fields and trying to help the brethren. We set up regular AIM meetings. We built structure and have a strong identification so brethren would know that we were serious about what we were doing. And we had booths at various lectureships and workshops trying to promote AIM, trying to get the idea of AIM, the concept in the hearts and the minds of brethren. In fact, we didn't even have a name at that time. And someone said, wouldn't it be good if we had a name? And so I remember the afternoon that Bobby and Tex and I were in a classroom downstairs across from the large classroom down in the basement. And I remember we talked about mission, and then we talked about adventure. And it was brought up that if young people were going to be involved in this certainly ought to be an adventure for them, so that when they would come back, it was such a great adventure in their life that they would be able then, maybe they'd get the idea of going ahead and studying and for another 2 years and preaching the word, and maybe go back to the field where they had been. And so we started putting all these words together and came up with Adventures in Missions, which I think is an excellent name and one that really does capture the passion that we have. Our premise was, if this is a real adventure in missions for our young, then perhaps they will want to be further engaged in missions upon their return from the field. And when we got a chance, here's the emphasis we would make. Let's bring our young men and women to the battlefront. Let them smell the smoke of battle and train them, and let them see their position in the fight. To dress them in the helmet of salvation and teach them how to use the word of the Spirit, and to put on them the breastplate of righteousness, and they will be better prepared than any Goliath of the world. So that was a sort of an emphasis, a premise that we tried to make everywhere we went. Please don't be slow to see the seeds of greatness which God beheld in David. God saw it in David, and God can see it in each of us. And if we will rely on Him and place ourselves, our lives in His hands, He will bring out any greatness that He has designed in us. The following September, when we started, there were 3 in attendance. And I remember sitting up in a classroom and teaching those 3. And I must say, we had a wonderful time. There was a young man, a young woman who were married, and then one other person. And then 9 in the middle of that year came to be in the AIM program. And then by the next August, when the school started, we had 26. And they met in a classroom downstairs, and it had a little window in it. And I'll never forget, every time I would come up that way, Brother Klein Payton was standing looking through that window. He had the biggest grin you've ever seen on anybody's face. He was just delighted to see 26 have come. He said, I really do believe the day is going to arrive when more will come to AIM than the 2-year preaching program that we have. And so they could see that this was young people actually turning their lives over to God and allowing Christ to take up a position in their living room of their heart. The classroom had a door with a window. I just told you that, and it just seemed to take off from there. Sometimes there were more, sometimes there were less. I must tell you, one of the things that I deeply resented, and I got a lot of kidding from the faculty on this. In fact, I think they waited until I came to Brown Bag before they started. And that was that some of the 2-year boys, some of the 2-year students, sort of like some of our AIM girls. And I used to say, just a minute, I didn't go around this country in a orange Volkswagen to recruit a wife for them. I can't. I'm trying to get kids to come to, and so I built up this thing, and the faculty knew all it took to get me going, and so I got that almost on a daily basis. I remember being invited to speak at the Mid-American Mobilization Seminar. I had to memorize that all week. And it was in Springfield, Missouri. And I thought, wow, we're being invited to places now. And I thought we had made it big time. I honestly did, because this was one of the biggest gatherings of university students in the United States. Stanley Shipp, some of you may know Stanley, he was down the hall from me, and they were hanging out his door like sardines. I mean, they were packed in there. And if you know Stanley, he would tell jokes and he could act things out, and kids loved that. And I was just nervous me. But anyway, I was down the hall, and when I got up to speak, I had 2 teenage boys in my audience. That's all I had. And I remember my heart hit my boots. And halfway through, an old man shuffled into the room and sat down. And so I had 3 in my audience. And so 3 months later, Brother Don Solomon, who was working with me at the time, was up in Springfield, Missouri, looking for support for 16 who were going to Medellin, Colombia. But they were going to Honduras first, to a language school. And he said he was amazed when an old gentleman spoke up. He was one of the elders. Don didn't know who he was. And he said, the old gentleman said, is this the program that Brother Nat Cooper was talking about? Is this the one that gets all the young people together and they go into foreign countries? And he started asking a bunch of questions. And then finally he said to the other elders, I believe I make a motion that we support this group, that we help this group. And so from that, I was taught a lesson. Don't count God out. There might only be 2 in the audience, but God has them there for a purpose. And God knows what his plan is. And someone who's as inefficient as myself, and my vision doesn't go far enough, can't always see what God has in mind. And so that's something I want to say that I was so grateful that we learned this earlier on. Over and over, people would ask how many of the kids from West Texas are getting involved. And that's when we realized we needed to get the word out in West Texas and New Mexico, and not do things by chance. We needed definite plans. We needed to take the initiative. And so we attached a foreign evangelism forum for youth to the regular world forum that had been going on for several years, and we put them both together. I went to the South Park Inn, which is now the Holiday Inn on the Loop, and I signed my name for every room in that place. And I don't mind bragging on this, because I was a nervous wreck until this was over with. It meant that the man asked me at the time, he said, do you know what you're doing? Because if you don't use one of these rooms, you still have to pay for it. And every day, Klein would meet me and he would say, why, I don't know where we're going to get the money from. I don't know where we're going to get the money from. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, how much response have we had? How many of these rooms are being taken? Well, the fact of the matter was, 3 days, let me say this. That meant we had to pay for every room, used or not used. People were to call in for rooms, and they were even willing to have kids bring their sleeping bags to help them save money. The people over there were wonderful. 3 days before, the manager called me and he asked, what are you going to do with all these empty rooms? This was 3 days before the event took place. The day before the forum was to begin, the manager called back and he said, we can't facilitate all these people who have called us. You better have some private homes ready for these people. And according to Klein, that was the largest forum we ever had up until then. There were 2,300 people that attended that forum. And there were the adults came. The adults came from over here. This is where the adult one was being held. We were over there. They came over and joined us on a Friday night. Do any of you remember that? And we had chairs everywhere. I mean, it was just wonderful. We had over 1,000 young people come from all over Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, California, Arizona, Oklahoma, and on it went. Our logo was designed and made by Charlie Valentine, and it was 20 feet tall. It was 5 students that were putting the flag up, and there are over here on this sheet there is a picture of it, and they had Jesus, I believe it was, on the flag, and I believe every youth group that attended wanted that flag. And finally, we had to write out names and had a drawing, and a group with Earl Williams from Houston. They're the ones that got that flag or that thing. And the last time we saw it, they had it tied down on top of a bus. And they were headed out for Houston. Not everyone was receptive to youth being involved in missions. Some of our aimers would come back on Sunday having a weekend meeting with elders and church leaders, and they were terribly discouraged over some of the things that were said to them. In fact, they were most of it was they were being questioned about their years, your age. Do you think you can do this? Aren't you too young? Some of them did not receive that much encouragement, but we kept promoting the uniqueness of our young people. And here's why I think our young men and women are valuable to the thrust of world evangelism. This is what I would tell elders. Number one, they are able to adjust to foreign and domestic situations. Number two, they know how to get accepted. Number three, they're highly motivated. Number four, they are optimistic towards new opportunities. Number five, they don't struggle with the weight of prejudice. Number six, they can reach their peers. And number seven, they can reach their peers while reaching back to their adults. Well, when our youth are given greater responsibility, note that it brings to light the potential that I believe that God has built into our youth. I think when you read the 17th chapter of the book of 1 Samuel, when you see a young boy called David, who was a teenager, and out of all of those forces on Israel's side, a young boy makes his way out into the battle arena and takes on a giant. I think that should be a very, 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 very strong hint that God has placed something in our youth. And I think that if a man is really a leader in the church, in the body of Christ, he will untiringly look for that quality in every young man or woman who comes up out of that baptistry, and will grab hold of them and try to incite them and give them some feeling of vision. So when our youth are given greater responsibility, note that it brings to light the potential that God has built into our youth. So I would say, it guarantees a greater maturity for the church's future. It places youth in the mainstream of the work of God's kingdom. It challenges spirituality and keeps it from becoming lethargic and apathetic. It allows them to give self in the absence of not having money. It dares them to return to the field and stay to further their biblical education and return fully prepared. It helps them to ripen and acquire healthy leadership ideals to be used in future decisions in the local church in the missions program. Well, I want to just sort of recount at this point some of the things that we heard, stories that began to emerge. I remember Klein telling me, and I think this was a time when he was trying to encourage me, but he said, I just flew back from South America from a lectureship. Reuel Lemons and I sat together. Reuel Lemons, many of you may not have known who he was. He was a tremendous harbinger for mission work. And he was editor of the Firm Foundation. And he was a man really who knew missions inside and out. But he made a statement to Klein. He said the AIM program was going to produce some of the greatest missionaries the church has had since World War II. And I thought that was quite an impressive statement to be made. He already saw how AIM was coming along. We had a young man who graduated. I don't know if any of you remember him or not. His name was Tom Moore. And Tom went to New Guinea. He worked over there with Curtis Harrison. And he would go to the mountain men every week. He was a namer. I was told that he would go up into the mountains, and it took him all day and part of the evening to get up there. He met with these men, and they would sit down, and he would study with them. I was told that everyone was impressed with him because he would drive a Jeep over rivers and you name it to get up there. And then part of the way up, he would take a motorcycle off the Jeep and load all the stuff on the motorcycle. And then he would take off, and the mountain men would meet him halfway up the mountain where they lived. And they would help him carry his materials. And then they would help him get set up. And he showed the Jewel Miller film strips to these men, by the way, who 15 years before were registered headhunters with the government. They would help him set up his equipment, and he would use a battery from the motorcycle to give them the power in order to do it. I'll tell you, Tom Moore was something else. Joe Cannon came here. Some of you know Joe Cannon, outstanding missionary. Joe Cannon told the Sunset Church, he said, if you can send us 100 Tom Moores, we would be very, very grateful to you. It would be one of the greatest things that ever happened to New Guinea. And then Randy Living Good. How many of you remember Randy Living Good? I doubt there's a soul here who does. When Randy was here, going through AIM, I don't believe that Randy spoke 5 words. He was just a quiet, unassuming boy. I just loved him like my own son. There's hardly a week goes by I don't think of Randy. He had a scar on his face here from a motorcycle accident. When it came time for Randy to go with a group, there was a discussion on our faculty. Should Randy go? Should we encourage Randy to go? Because he's such a quiet, sincere, sort of a passive individual, to where, and so good-hearted, that people will take advantage of him, and maybe do him worse harm than good. And so there was a lot of discussion on that. But Randy went. And do you know Randy? I told you, while he was here, you hardly heard a word out of him. The Amers told me when I went to visit them in Medellin, Colombia, to study the Beatitudes, they said that there is not a decision made by this group unless Randy Living Good is present. This group loves Randy. It turned out Randy became their leader. Not only that, he made the highest grades in language in Honduras. And I noticed when I was there, and they had been there a year and a half, Randy looked to me like he was maybe depressed. And so I asked the missionary there, is there another work we could get Randy to do? Because Randy was assigned to go to the garbage dumps. And those people who lived in the garbage dumps, Randy would go there and walk through those dumps every day, and he would set up studies with those people. And I remember asking some girls in AIM, has he been successful? They said no, because these people are so transient. They live out of cardboard boxes. And when Randy would set up an appointment, he would go the next day to keep his appointment. The family wasn't there. They had been moved somewhere else in these boxes that they lived out of. I was just so impressed. When I would see Randy walking, I thought, what's that thing that's flopping under his feet? And I asked one of our aimers from Ireland, what is that? And they said, that's the sole of his boots. They just flop. He has worn off the sole of his boots. And I said, well, I'm going to buy him another pair of boots. And they said, you better be careful, because if you buy him a pair of boots and bring them to him, they'll be on somebody's feet tomorrow, somebody else's feet tomorrow. And if you give him money, he'll turn around and give the money away. This is the way he was. This whole group here in Medellin were absolutely fantastic. I went to their apartments. They had given their furniture away. Some of those kids only had butter boxes, orange crates, apple boxes to sit on for furniture. I remember in one house I went into, a young man called Jim. He died after he came back here, and I can't remember his last name. But in his house, he just had a crate. That was the table that they ate off. I mean, you talk about sacrifice. I was just absolutely amazed at this and at the way in which they did this. Brother Tex and I were there one time. The director of the language school called us in. He said, gentlemen, I have a problem. Maybe you can help us with it. We said, okay. He said, it has to do with the AIM students. And I thought, oh, no, somebody has pulled a stunt, and now we're all in trouble. And he said, no. He said, here's what it is. He said, we have Peace Corps people attending our language school here. And then after they study in the classroom, we place them with families and said, none of the families want the Peace Corps people. They want the AIM people. And it's embarrassing, because we've got to a point where we don't know what to do. And we said, well, just do what you think is the right thing to do. You know, mix them up or whatever. He said, I can't. He said, these kids are terrific. In fact, he said, some of these Peace Corps people already have their master's degree, and yet the Aimers are making higher grades in language than they are. And he went on to say that Randy Livingood was just an outstanding linguist. Later, when they gave Randy a new assignment there, he took Ed Horton's book, The Church of Christ, translated it into Spanish. And I was told that the missionaries will be using that book in South America for the next 100 years. And that he translated various other books. So here was a young man that while he was here, you teachers need to watch out. Somebody in your class is very, very quiet, super quiet. Don't let that fool you. And use them to the glory of God. There was a group, there was a young man called Jim Cunningham. Do any of you remember Jim Cunningham? The dearest of dearest. I'll tell you, I didn't know if I would ever get over the death of Jim Cunningham. I was down there with him. We went and taught a lady, old lady. It was very early, like 6:30 or 7 on a Sunday morning. We baptized her in a donkey trough at the back of a yard. The people were just waiting for Jim to come back again. They all loved him. All those mothers loved him. He was a great teacher. He loved people. He knew how to meet people. And anyway, Jim came back here, and of course he passed away. And we were very, very sorry that happened. But God knows, I wrestled with God over that one. I don't mind telling you. You know, we train them, then you take them from us. But God has to have his will. I want to mention one other group, and that was a group that went to Londonderry, Northern Ireland. And it was there when the missionaries got word, I was there when the missionaries got word that they had gone into a section of the city of Derry, D-E-R-R-Y. And it was called the Bogside. And it was on January the 30th, 1972. It was called Bloody Sunday. And that's where the Protestants and the Catholics met, began shooting at each other. And they had the streets barricaded. They had lighted tires. They even put their furniture out there. The police were not permitted to enter into those neighborhoods. There was Patrick Joseph Doherty, Barnard McGuigan, Hugh Pius Gilmer, and Kevin McElhaney, and Michael Gerald Kelly, and John Pius Young, and William Newell Nash, and Michael M. McDavid, and James Joseph Ray, and Gerald Doherty, and Jared James McKinney, and William Anthony McKinney, and Gerald McKinney, and John Johnson. And all of these people got shot and killed the same day. And a few days later, our aimers went into that neighborhood. The police couldn't even get in. I don't know how they got in, but they got in. And they started going from door to door. And they said they never drank as much tea in all their life. Said that the people had them in and had tea for them, didn't want them to leave. It showed the respect they had for these kids, even though they would have classified them as Protestants, and yet these families were Catholics. It showed that they were looking for a camaraderie, a unity. And I really believe that our kids showed them that there can be a unity in Jesus Christ. And they demonstrated it with the acceptance they gave those people. One girl from the group in Glencairn went from door to door, and she would simply ask, she was a namer, "Is there anything we can do for you?" They called this making service calls, but you can see where it's headed. It wasn't long until the service turned into evangelism. One lady asked if she knew anything about hair, and the Samer girl said, yes, I do. I used to work in a hair salon, and so she started doing her hair. And one morning, this older lady said, "When are you going to say something to me about the Bible?" And she later was baptized. And the thing was, her son was one of the evangelists in Northern Ireland who had been trying to convert her for years. And here's a young AIM girl comes and hooks up with her and leads her to Jesus Christ. In Africa, AIM was well received. They would turn on their the people in the communities. If they saw the missionaries coming, they turned on their hoses to water their grass. But when the Aimers came, they'd turn their hoses off. That showed acceptance right there. Wayne Reed was one of the original ones to go to Dublin. He was a fine young man. You could not tell Wayne from an Irish person because he dressed in tweeds. He had a tweed cap and the whole thing. He even had a few words that were Irish. But anyway, Wayne was one of the original ones that went to Dublin. He later wrote children's books. And I don't know if even some of our teachers here know this, but he was invited. They were a great success, and he was invited to a writers' guild, which was celebrating authors. And he didn't realize it, but when he got there, he found out that they were celebrating him. And he was just his parents were so pleased at this. Tim Lowry of Dallas was supported in Dublin by his brother and another boy. They started a paper route and supported him the whole 2 years he was there. Tim Lowry had a dog, and they would walk in Trinity Park in Dublin. And, the Irish can't pass up a dog. And so they would stop and talk about their dog, and the next thing you knew, they didn't realize it, but the people who were inquiring about the dog were actually setting up their own Bible study, because this is the way it went. And we had a missions forum for youth here at Lubbock Civic Center. And that year, our kids gave $12,282 for world evangelism. I thought that was... They mowed lawns. They sold charm bracelets. One young man from Dallas sold his prize hog. It goes on and on. I could take all day to tell you the sacrifices that they made. I remember the young man with the hog stood up over here at Holiday Inn now, and And we were talking about sending people, and he stood up and he said, well, my hog doesn't know it, but he's about to become a missionary when I return to Dallas. And that's what he did. I was told he went back and he sold that hog. It actually won first prize, and then he gave the money to help. So I really think we need to continue to bring our young men and women to the battlefront. To take our strongest, here's a challenge I'd like to give to you all in AIM today. Find out which school in all of the satellite schools that SIBI has. Find out which one is the strongest satellite school. And in that congregation, start a satellite AIM program. And put your concentration on that. Let it grow. Let it become fertile. Let it reach out. Let it get a little bit of history. And then take the same idea and go to the next congregation and the next congregation. I believe that we could have an AIM extension school, and this could spread throughout the nation. We need to smell the smoke of battle. As one man put it, I think it was Vance Havner. Any of you know of Vance Havner? Vance Havner, the old Baptist preacher, they've been thrown off of more lectureships than you can think of for things that he said. I called one time and said, is Vance Havner on this lectureship? And they said, of course not. So I knew, his reputation has gotten down there before him. But he says he thinks that every young man and woman that becomes a soul winner, a preacher, a servant, they ought to dangle them on the end of a pole over the fires of hell for half an hour and then send them out to preach. And he said, boy, would they preach some whoppers of sermons. So I read an account recently where two archaeologists, I always think of David. David was a character I used a lot promoting AIM. I really believe this. They gave, like Daniel, they gave him a Babylonian name, but they couldn't give him a Babylonian character. They gave him a Babylonian position, but they couldn't give him a Babylonian disposition. And David was the same. It was muscle against spirit. And David went out depending on God. And we see this because Goliath's perception of the fight that day was to win another victory. That was not the perception of David. David's perception is seen in the word uncircumcised. He said, you are an uncircumcised advocate. Uncircumcised meant you are out of covenant relationship with God. This is a battle of evil against right. I'm on the side of right. I was taking care of my father's sheep. He protected me from the lion. I was taking care of my father's sheep. He protected me from the bear. God had given David a source of reference so David could refer back to the victories that he had to take care of the present, you see. And that's what AIM is about. One of these days you're going to return from the field and you're going to have these opportunities on the field. And what is this going to be for you? A point of reference. Even when you become an elder, it's going to be a point of reference. It's going to give you spiritual thrust in your life to go out into the valley of the world's Elahs and to take on challenges. I read recently where two archaeologists were digging in the valley of Elah. One had found inside a casket, a message scribbled on pottery. He shouted to his friend, he said, "Hey, Bob, this man died from a heart attack." He said, "How do you know that?" It says on here, "I bet 80 shekels on Goliath."